NVIDIA now below DeepSeek lows, suggesting that January 27th sell-off might have been more than just a knee-jerk reaction, potentially more of a structural shift. Now, concerns, of course, are piling up. You've been talking about it all morning. There's CapEx and efficiency questions, the threat of an expanded chip ban, and now, of course, these new China tariffs. Now, NVIDIA is the poster child of this unwind, but it is hitting AI and tech more broadly. The SMH Semi ETF down nearly 10% this year, and all of the mega caps, except for Meta, are underwater. Now, here at the Palace Hotel, the CFOs of Alphabet and Microsoft, they're set to speak today. NVIDIA's CFO, Colette Kress, she's set to speak tomorrow. The stakes really couldn't be higher, especially given this sell-off and concerns around the AI trade and tariffs. Key question, will they hedge or temper language around CapEx as tariffs introduce new uncertainty? Some investors, like Dan Niles in your interview a few moments ago, they have expressed skepticism around these huge ramps in spend, saying that some level of digestion is needed. So could any of these CFOs allude to that in any way?
Josh, Kerry mentioned NVIDIA being higher today. You know, that's been a pain point within the market. Bernstein's Stacey Rascon says valuations are looking increasingly attractive. They suggest that that stock has done historically well if you buy it at 25 times or lower. It's obviously had a huge pullback. We've suggested, well, you're not really going to get a better feeling market until the likes of NVIDIA looks a little better in its own right.
I mean, there are so many green stocks right now that we should be talking to, like eBay, Alphabet, McDonald's. Like, these are pretty big market caps. But Scott, you're right. To that point, nothing is big enough to offset NVIDIA. There's no 10 stocks that are big enough to offset NVIDIA. So I do think it's important for maybe not necessarily overall volatility, but just for the indices to kind of find some support. You kind of have to have a name like NVIDIA bottom and go green. Look, 26 times forward earnings with a 50% growth rate, a buyback, and arguably some of the best news flow of the year out of any stock still ahead, including a huge developers conference in March. Why wouldn't this stock be a buy here? So I agree with that sentiment. And, you know, if I'm out looking for things to do, and I haven't done this yet, I would have it on the list.
NVIDIA, to your point, its stock is on a wild ride, trading at a market multiple that almost matches the S&P 500. So when normally it should be trading at a premium because it's a growth company still. And that raises the question, is NVIDIA undervalued? Some are saying yes. Or is the market headed for a fall, you know, for that market multiple to be lower? There's still a lot of regulatory risk for NVIDIA. AI diffusion rules restricting chip exports to certain countries that would come into play this May. The possibility of further China bans, specifically the H20s. We talked about that yesterday, but just it is a big portion of their business to China.
After Q4 earnings. That's not justified, right? Like, but we're talking about some of those names, like NVIDIA's like, oh, maybe they'll grow earnings only 65% of 70. I mean, come on, no? And then like, oh yeah, that needs to be 30% down. Really? On that kind of news? No, that's way, way, way overdone to me. So even in the Mag 7, even in tech, and then overall then obviously in the US, I think you want to buy that as well. It's not a point of buying Europe over the US, it's buying Europe and China and the US. It's actually really broadly where things are still pretty all right.
We will leave it there. That's right.
I think today, when you look at the rally that you had in NVIDIA, yeah, it was just pressed down. It was down nearly 30% from those recent highs. It was a crowded trade. People got out of it, and people are going to be looking for opportunities to get back into both of them.
And I think we were correctly cautious since that January engulfing pattern across the desk, and that proved to be right. And today's the first day in terms of price action. You can actually make a case. You can play it from the long side. I'm not saying it's going straight up from here, but you know that 110 low to your earlier point, that was a low that we saw basically back in September on heavy volume, which is a good sign. So for me, for the first time in a while, NVIDIA actually looks nice for a trade.
All right, I hope you're all doing well today and staying calm in this market. The S&P finished the day about 1.2% lower, and NVIDIA finished the day about 1.7% higher. Here's what I want to talk about in this video. I'll briefly touch on what happened in the broader market today. Then I want to share my thoughts on NVIDIA's current price. Third, I want to briefly mention GTC. And then finally, I want to share two potential short-term risks for NVIDIA. And one of those risks isn't really being talked about right now, but I want you to be prepared just in case. All right, so today, tariffs on Canada, Mexico, and China went into effect, prompting some threats of retaliatory tariffs, and the market did not like that. The market so sold off at the open, then traded higher during the day before selling off into the close. That being said, Commerce Secretary Lutnick was on TV today after market close saying that a compromise will likely be announced tomorrow with Canada and Mexico. He clarified that this will not be a pause to the tariffs, but rather a meet me in the middle type of compromise. And so that could provide some slight relief to markets tomorrow. We'll see what happens. Now about NVIDIA. I want to go back to something I brought up in yesterday's video, and that is NVIDIA's current multiple compared to some of its Mag 7 peers. As of NVIDIA's closing price today of $115.99, NVIDIA was trading at roughly 39.5 times current earnings. Apple was trading at about 37.5 times current earnings, and Amazon's trailing PE was about 36.9 as of today's closing price. In yesterday's video, these PE ratios were even closer to each other than they are now, but the point I made yesterday still stands. I mentioned yesterday that NVIDIA was trading at a very similar current PE ratio to that of Apple and Amazon, but here's the thing. NVIDIA is expected to grow substantially more than both Apple and Amazon over the next 1 to 2 years. And so while fast money has been flowing out of NVIDIA after earnings as traders come to grips with a slowing revenue growth rate, I think it's only a matter of time before fundamental investors jump into this stock once they realize that they're paying about as much for NVIDIA as they are for Apple and Amazon. But with NVIDIA, they're getting a much greater growth rate over the next 2 years. And who knows, maybe today was the first day of exactly that. Maybe some fundamental investors are starting to realize this, I don't know. Regardless of that, I think NVIDIA is very compellingly valued here, given the company's expected growth rate over the next 2 years. I also think 2026 is very likely to be another growth year for NVIDIA. And so once investors realize NVIDIA is compellingly priced, and once they realize that 2026 is very likely to be another growth year, I think we'll see sentiment pick up in the stock. And with GTC this month and Jensen's keynote on March 18th, maybe that's when some investors will start to realize that 2026 is likely going to be another growth year. Maybe they'll start to realize this after Jensen unveils new products on the 18th. We were told on NVIDIA's earnings call that Jensen's keynote will be a quote, news-packed event where we will learn more about Blackwell Ultra, Rubin, and the next clip of product after Rubin. So mark your calendars for that event. Okay, now I want to talk about 2 potential short-term risks I see for NVIDIA. The first one is well known, but the second one isn't really being talked about right now, and I want to make sure you're prepared for it just in case. All right, so the first short-term risk is an announcement of reciprocal tariffs in early April. Secretary Lutnick was on CNBC this morning, and I'm paraphrasing, but he basically said that the president will have all the necessary tools in his belt starting on April 2nd to impose reciprocal tariffs. And so if tariffs on Taiwan are announced, then that will most likely put some short-term pressure on NVIDIA stock. So be prepared for that just in case. The second potential short-term risk that I see is the upcoming release of DeepSeek's R2. Now I have no idea how market participants will react to this release. And I seriously hope market participants have learned their lesson after the initial DeepSeek sell-off back in January, but I'm not so sure. If you remember, DeepSeek's R1 gained a lot of attention back in January because DeepSeek claimed they only spent $6 million and built R1 on old NVIDIA GPUs. Back then I said repeatedly that something wasn't adding up and that I thought DeepSeek was actually using high-end NVIDIA GPUs and that I thought they had a budget much larger than $6 million. And in the weeks following, that appeared to be correct and NVIDIA recovered a lot from its DeepSeek lows. Now we don't know for certain when R2 will be released, but based on what I'm hearing and what I'm seeing online, it appears that DeepSeek is rushing to launch R2 and it will likely be released sometime between now and early May. So possibly this month or next. Now again, I don't think DeepSeek's models are a problem for NVIDIA at all. I think they're actually great for NVIDIA and will help drive even more demand for NVIDIA's products. That being said, I still hear many managers and analysts on financial television who still have absolutely no understanding of DeepSeek's R1. I've even withheld some clips from these videos over the past few weeks because some people went on financial television to talk about NVIDIA, but they still had a dangerously misinformed understanding of DeepSeek. Don't get me wrong, I'm not an expert on this stuff, but I understand that DeepSeek's models are not bad for NVIDIA. Unfortunately, there are some managers and members of the financial press who do not yet understand this, and therefore, we could potentially see some short-term negative price action in NVIDIA when R2 is released. Hopefully I'm wrong about that, and market participants have learned after what happened in January. But that remains to be seen. If NVIDIA trades lower following the launch of DeepSeek's R2, I expect it to be just a short-term dip in price and not a long-term problem. I'm bringing this to your attention now, so that if you see the financial press freaking out and running around like headless chickens after R2 is launched, you know to relax and stay calm, because it's actually a good thing for NVIDIA in the long run, not a bad thing. I don't know what will happen in the short term, because anything could happen. But from a long-term perspective, I think NVIDIA is compellingly valued at these levels, and I think the company's brightest days are ahead. At least that's my view of the situation. Remember to stay calm in this market. Remember to maintain a long-term perspective, and do not make any hasty or irrational decisions. With all of that being said, I hope you all have a great rest of the day, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts about NVIDIA in the comments below. Please leave a like on this video so more people will see it. And while you're down there, please consider subscribing. It's free, and you can always change your mind. Thanks for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video.